Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about the Gospel Coalition again. But this time, they say stop spreading woke preacher clips. Stop spreading woke preacher clips. That's basically the purpose of this latest article by Trevin Wax of the Gospel Coalition. Now, Trevin Wax, he's a pretty high-level guy at the Gospel Coalition. Maybe a false teacher. I would not say he's one of the good guys over at Gospel Coalition, so that's just something a little background on the guy. He's not as woke as he could be, but I do believe he is compromised on several fronts. But so that's a little bit about Trevin Wax, and this is his article written today, January 25th, and that's the advantage of recording in the middle of the night. You can totally get ahead of stories like this before the friendly competition does. So this article is titled "Gotcha! Sermon clips are bad for the church." And I'm going to hardcore disagree with this because the premise is, or the headline clickbait, or the clickbait title of the headline is wrong. And let's actually read the substance of the article. 15 years ago, an outlandish sermon clip made the rounds on YouTube. It was a shock jock independent pastor ranting in front of a tiny congregation about modern Bible translations. It was comical, unnerving, and cringe-inducing. I shared it on my blog. I was new to blogging, and around that time I asked an older, wiser pastor to speak into my writing. He asked a pointed question: who is edified by that sermon video? And then he encouraged me to resist the urge to share something just because it was outrageous, entertaining, or a cautionary tale of how not to preach. Now, it is worth mentioning that those reasons alone are not the best reasons to share a clip of a pastor, but those are not the only reasons why that clip was shared. And that's not the only reason why, that was a 15-year ago example. So what is the modern context for bringing that story up? So that's what we got to be talking about in this article. I thought about that conversation recently as it predicated Twitter and Instagram and the prevalence of sermon clips that now circulate far and wide. In the past decade or so, more and more churches have begun posting video and audio of previous sermons. For the past 500 years, sermons were spread mainly in the form of pamphlets and books. And a century ago, radio stations began broadcasting sermons around the world. For decades, prominent pastors had tape ministries, but now most pastors are expected to have both video and audio of their preaching available, and the pandemic sped up the motion towards live streaming. There have been outliers, of course. Martin Lloyd-Jones believed people experience a sermon differently when they hear it with a congregation and see a preacher in person. That is true. I would agree with that. The power of the preaching moment itself cannot be replicated via a screen or a speaker. Today, not only are sermon podcasts and videos made available online, but sermon clips circulate on various social media platforms. Justin Taylor describes some of these as gospel moments, whether they show Alistair Begg preaching about a thief on a cross entering heaven, or Matt Chandler's powerful, probably not that powerful, illustration that says Jesus wants the rose. Is that a Bachelor reference? I'm a dude, so I don't watch that. Just a minute or two of gospel gold. So here's where we're actually going to get into the real context of Trevin Wax's article. So it's, again, the real context, and he's going to point to two examples, David Platt and John MacArthur, which I just think is kind of bad juxtaposition. So let's go. But there is a flip side to the sharing of gospel moments. Many sermon clips go viral because of how bad they are. We gawk at examples of sloppy or heretical preaching, as we should. Social media accounts now feature the most outlandish moments from preachers or teachers who belong to another camp or tribe. He's talking about woke preacher clips here. He's talking about woke preacher clips, and that's the hilarious part, that he won't even name woke preacher clips in this, but we all know he's talking about woke preacher clips because that is the account dedicated to this. I've also done some good work on this as well because I exposed that Revoice video that was behind a paywall, and I took it out of that paywall and exposed it to a general audience. So, and Woke Preacher Clips helped promoted that video, by the way. So shout out to him again. Some of these point the spotlight on crazy fundamentalists. Now, I have seen like IFB preacher clips. I think I have seen that as well. Others root out the most woke. In either case, we're introduced to preachers who seem determined to live up to the worst caricatures. At times, we see clips from charismatic megachurch pastors delivering inspirational drivel rather than sound biblical teaching. The intended reaction, it appears, is to name and shame the bad preacher and to shake one's head in pity or disgust. Now, I don't know about that latter part, but yes, we should be naming and shaming bad preachers. That is the entire goal of this, is to name and shame bad preachers. Drive these people out of the mainstream, make them the fringe. Make people like Thabiti Anyabwile the fringe. Make people like Dottie Lewis the fringe. Make people like Craig Rochelle the fringe, not the mainstream. These people should not have celebrity-sized audiences. Christian Post should not be writing a favorable piece about Dottie Lewis in 2022 after all the damage he has done to the church. Now, exposing these preacher clips exposes these people and therefore helps undermine their ministry, and it doesn't destroy their ministry. I'll be honest about that. It's rare that a person's ministry is entirely destroyed, but they do have to move out of the camp, and that's a good thing. Beth Moore cannot make money in the Southern Baptist Convention. She cannot make money in the Southern Baptist Convention. So she has to go to the Hillsong crowd. She has to go to the Catholic LARPing Anglicans. She has to go to those people because she cannot make money in the Southern Baptist Convention. Russell Moore got chewed out of the Southern Baptist Convention to some degree. Now he's now going to Christianity, or Compromise Today, as I call it, and because he can't cut it in he can't cut it in the Southern Baptist Convention anymore. He's just too hot. And Ed Stetzer, I think, is on the chopping block as well. Now, again, we need to shame Francis Collins and those who support him out of the mainstream. We need to shame these people out of the mainstream because the Bible talks about false teachers and their rampancy. People will not tolerate sound doctrine. They want ear tickling. That's the issue of the church in modern day America. They want ear tickling, not sound doctrine. And there is not just one way to get it to the right course. We also need to have a pound these people out of the mainstream strategy. It's spiritual warfare. We need to recognize that this is spiritual warfare, and we need to stop being nicer than God about this issue and start actually exposing heretics like Dottie Lewis, like David Platt, and all these other people at the Gospel Coalition. So where even was I? At times we see, I believe I already read that. Even worse, in many cases, sermon clips become ammunition for ongoing battles. How's that worse? Each clip becomes another piece of evidence that the evangelical church is quickly becoming woke, or that evangelicals are becoming white nationalists. Even well-known and respected pastors with many years of ministry experience, men like John MacArthur and David Platt. Hold up. Are we really going to compare the ministry experience of John MacArthur and David Platt? Really? Let's put aside people who don't like David or don't like John MacArthur. David Platt is a failure in ministry experience. You look at his tenure at the International Mission Board and you look at his tenure at the head of McLean Bible Church. He is an absolute poison pill for any organization he is a part of. I don't know how you put that in the same sentence as John MacArthur. In fact, I couldn't even put David Platt in the same sentence as someone like Chris Hodges of ARC or, not someone that's our friend, but you know what I'm saying, someone that can build a successful ministry. David Platt cannot build a successful ministry because he's woke, and woke people cannot build things. They can only destroy and subvert institutions that already exist. So that is just don't even put those people in the same sentence, because David Platt can't even build things. Are subject to the forces of this online dissemination. MacArthur became an example of anti-religious liberty, and David Platt an example of wokeism, all because they've said, perhaps sloppily, have been weaponized against them to cast doubts on the rest of their Bible teaching. Absolutely, we need to cast doubts on David Platt's Bible teaching. Now, just a note about John MacArthur, because I never did a video or talked about John MacArthur being attacked for his anti-religious liberty views. I think I almost did, but I couldn't really bring myself to care enough about the issue, I'll be honest, because I just found what John MacArthur said to be very agreeable. I don't believe, and when you look at the context for why he's saying what he's saying what he's saying because you got organizations like the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, which was longtime helmed by Russell Moore. They would fight for the rights of Muslims to build mosques, but they would not defend the church from government lockdowns. They fought for religious liberty at the expense of fighting for Christianity. That's what John MacArthur was talking about. That's the context for John MacArthur's words, and I found those words agreeable within the context of what he was talking about. Now, do I agree with John MacArthur's worldview on government and our role with the government? No, absolutely not. I think that's pretty obvious if you have a history of watching my videos. But on the point of religious liberty, I don't care enough about the issue to fight for pagans to worship pagan gods. I can't be bothered to care about that, because it's not, because I believe one of the points he makes is that religious liberty would basically be used against Christians. I believe that was one of the larger points that he made. Now, I do believe that he's wrong that a Christian government, if Christianity denied religious liberty to other religions, I don't think that necessarily has a bad result. That's how you get an era of Christendom in, say, Western Europe. That's how that emerged, is because governments crack down on paganism. Just historical fact there. And I don't think that was a bad policy, to be honest. But I'm digressing. Now, David Platt, on the other word, has no credibility as a minister. So Trevin Wax is simping for David Platt here, trying to put him on the same level as John MacArthur, which is absurd, because John MacArthur can build a ministry. David Platt can only tear down a ministry. David Platt is justifying sin from the pulpit. I did an entire video on that. He's a branch Covidian. Not only is he that, he's also a social justice gospel advocate. He's a false teacher on 2 counts, in my opinion. And again, I don't think there's really anything redeeming about that when he is an enemy within the church. David Platt's an enemy. And I don't agree with everything John MacArthur says, but he's not an enemy. Unless maybe you're charismatic, then you might find him to be an enemy, which, to each his own. I don't believe the widespread sharing of bad moments in preaching will make the pulpit stronger. The weaponization of preaching clips as ammunition for intramural warfare isn't a healthy and life-giving development. Anyone who seeks to rightly handle the word knows the feeling, the inadequacy in preaching and teaching. I guess is a missing word there. I look back to sermons of mine just from a few years ago and find points I would make differently, analogies I'd cut, and the things about the Trinity that, while not heretical, are sloppier than they should have been. The more I've grown in my skill as a preacher and thinker and theologian, the sharper I hope my messages have become. Where's the sharpness? Where's the edge of his words? The point he's making is anti-intellectual. Let's be honest. His argument is basically it doesn't feel right, so it's not right. It doesn't feel like we're edifying the church, so we're not edifying the church. Well, that's not how it works. The Bible holds teachers to a higher standard than it does regular folk, which is why I rarely go after people who do not insert themselves in some sort of leadership category, whether they are a preacher or a major commentator. I don't really go after I don't go after people that are, I don't go after, say, celebrities that claim Christ unless they're trying to step into that role, like a Kanye West was kind of stepping into that role, or, Babylon Bee, or stuff like that. I don't really go after, a celebrity that claims Christ, maybe is a little sloppy on their beliefs. I don't necessarily go after that. Unless you're Drew Brees, then I will go after you for claiming Christ and then bending the knee, because that's just cowardice. And that needs to be called out as cowardice, so as to make an example of people so that others do not follow in his cowardice. There is edification in denigrating someone. There's edification in that. These people need to be thrown out so that they can come to repentance. So when you look at someone like David Platt, he is clearly unrepentant. He is clearly hypocritical in his ministry, and he's clearly false teaching. If exposing his errant teaching diminishes his congregation, so be it. If exposing his errant teaching gets people off of his books and stuff like that, so be it. That's a good thing. That is what edification looks like. If exposing the heretical teaching at the Southern Baptist seminaries prevents students from going to those seminaries, that is church edification. It doesn't feel like church edification, but if we have the future pastorate in this country not being educated by the Southern Baptist Convention, that future pastorate is better off than they were because of the exposure work of people like Woke Preacher Clips, of people like John Harris, of people like Protestia and Reformation Charlotte. And I'm going to throw myself in this category as well, because why not? That's what edification looks like. It may not feel like edification, but that's what it looks like. If you're going to do a rehab on a house, you got to do a demo at some point. You got to destroy the old layout to build a new layout. That's kind of what the church needs. I shudder for this 20-something learning just how to preach, or just learning how to preach, knowing that any potential misstep, bad analogy, or aberrant theological point could be taken from a sermon and broadcast to thousands of people as an example of what not to do. How paralyzing for the young preacher with a lifetime of learning ahead. Oh, boo-hoo. Let us all play the world's smallest violin for that plight. Who cares? If you cannot handle that pressure, you are obviously unfit and uncalled to be a pastor. You aren't called to this vocation, because that's what the vocation is. That is like saying, I'm called to be a public school teacher, but I don't want to do grading. I can't possibly fail a student. That's part of the job. It's part of the job. That's like being a nurse that doesn't like needles. It's part of the job. The church has endured bad and sloppy preaching through the centuries. You don't have to look hard to find cringe-inducing moments in sermons of Augustine, Chrysostom. Sorry, I'm bad with names. I've only ever seen that written, by the way. Or Luther. I suppose one could start an Instagram account that excerpts these terrible moments from the church fathers, perhaps highlighting anti-Semitic tendencies or strange hermeneutical leaps, or their view of women. But how does this build up the church? First of all, Martin Luther, what exactly did he say that was that anti-Semitic or incorrect? More importantly, incorrect. What exactly did he say that was incorrect? But does this build up the church? So here's where we can talk about motivation. When I do evangelical dark web, when I go after false teachers, when I go after people who should be doing better, like Trevin Wax, you should be doing better, bro. Stop with this feelings article and start using your brain for once. When I go after people like that, it is because I love the church. I am not the type that hates the church and wants to dismantle the church. I don't do this out of a hatred for the church. I do this out of a love for the church, out of a love for what the church should be, and calling the church to be obedient in hard times. We're in some hard times right now, and I'm trying to get the church into obedience. I'm trying to advocate for obedience to God in these hard times. And sometimes that means calling out the people that are advocating against obedience to God, like David Platt, like the Gospel Coalition. So that's about edification for the church. And if you don't love the church, this channel isn't really for you, to be honest. Again, and another thing to point out is if we don't go after these false teachers and the secular media exposes these false teachers, that looks worse. Looks worse. When you look at an example like Greg Locke, let's use Greg Locke as an example. Very partisan guy. Grassroots evangelical publications laid the wood in on him before he became a big CNN caricature of a right-wing pastor. He was exposed as someone who's unqualified to be a pastor by largely Seth Dunn, if we want to give credit where credit is due. Wouldn't it be better for us to expose that within the church than for the Houston Chronicle, the New York Times, the Washington Post? Wouldn't it be better for us to take care of our own rather than the secular media expose this nonsense? I mean, look at Mike Todd being a recent example of a viral clip. Wouldn't it be better for us to call that nonsense out rather than the secular media to make it seem cringe on our part? We should be taking care of our own. George should put down Lenny, not letting the rest of the village put him down for, alleged rape. If you get my reference to American literature. So Trevin Wax is not being logical here. He's thinking with his I don't even want to say heart, but you could say heart, which is deceitful above all else. So I believe this is the last section. Does it edify? And I think I've already addressed his arguments before I've actually read this, because I'm reading this article for the first time here. I can hear howls of protest of some of my pastor friends who share bad and bizarre clips on a regular basis. We're protecting the pulpit. We're instructing our people so they don't fall for this kind of bad preaching. We care about doctrine. And when we see the slipshod preaching, it's good to point it out. I get that. And I want to believe the best about people who share and comment on outlandish sermon clips. I do care about doctrine. I don't believe that. If he cared about doctrine, why is he writing for a gospel coalition? I care about avoiding analogies that confuse more than clarify. I am not opposed to using social media to talk about good versus bad preaching or to bring up examples that should be reconsidered. Okay. Yes, we can and sometimes should have substantive disagreements with sermons. We shouldn't cover up Luther's anti-Semitic writings, but recoil in horror at those sentiments and how they were used sometimes verbatim by Hitler hundreds of years later. You know who else Hitler used? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln inspired Adolf Hitler. But, no one wants to talk about that. Should we cancel Lincoln's writings that inspired? I don't know. But again, Martin Luther, where was he incorrect? Where was the error? But okay. It's good to engage with preachers and sermons, illuminating where they've gone wrong in the past and where people may be off base, even in the present. But surely there's a difference between careful, instructive engagement and a social media-driven gotcha clip that stirs the mob mentality. It doesn't stir the mob mentality. It exposes false teachers with a smoking gun of evidence. And sometimes you need to mobilize social media like that. And it's for the good of the church. Does the sharing of bad sermon clips really help our people in the way that we think? It does. It's possible that this phenomenon trains people to be better on lookout for sloppy moments in preaching, to be good critics more than good listeners, to approach the pulpit with an eye of the cynic rather than the mind of the Berean. Do gotcha clips build up the church and honor the gravity of what happens in moments of preaching? Or do they risk reducing a pastor to a bad moment, reinforcing a stereotype that may be unfair or false? What's an unfair or false stereotype about David Platt? He is woke and a Branch Covidian. What's an unfair? How is that an unfair characteristic of David Platt when considered in isolation from the rest of his ministry? I just don't see how the ministry of the church is strengthened by showcasing bad examples of preaching on social media. For that reason, I don't want to be a part of it. Whenever these clips come across my feed, I'm committing instead to pray that God will give grace and discernment to pastors as they seek to divide rightly His word. And I'm going to pray that in those times when we fall short in our preaching, He will give grace and will work despite our weaknesses to build up His people. Okay, let's just be honest. Point of order. Who is just being exposed on a woke preacher clip for sloppy preaching? Who? It's for woke preaching. It's for nonsensical points and illustrations. It's also not just pastors, but it's also seminary people and educators. So this is just nonsense. He is just too emotional to think rationally about the situation that we're in. He's clearly not fit for the times that we live in. He is not a son of Issachar. He's not one of those people. He's not a Berean either. He is someone that wants to be nicer than God. And he's no Ezra. He is no Ezra. Ezra fought for the church of his day. He is not an Ezra. So, those are my thoughts on Trevin Wax's crap, hyper-emotional, effeminate article. He's an effeminate writer. And that's really all I got to say about that. Leave a comment below about what you think about what I think. And if you like the Evangelical Dark Web and want to support real discernment ministry, the least you can do is like the video and subscribe to the channel. But the most you can do is become a subscriber over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. We got a Patreon-like system there, and you can become a subscriber. You can also get Evangelical Dark Web merch if you're interested in that as well. I made the merch mostly for myself so I can have something to wear during videos and stuff like that, or events. But obviously, to each his own. So have a blessed day. I will catch you on the next one.